Sometimes the cruelest thing isn't losing everything. It's watching others pretend you never had anything to lose. In 1887, a desperate widow stood on a dusty street corner in Bitter Creek, holding a sign, "Good dog, $50, please help." Her name was Mabel Hart. Her husband struck silver before he died. But everything vanished, the land, the gold, the documents proving what was hers. The town called her crazy. One man didn't. Marshal Eli Boone, 63 and half lame, was passing through when her quiet dignity stopped him cold. What he discovered would expose Bitter Creek's darkest secret. But could one broken-down lawman with a borrowed dog take on an entire town built on stolen dreams? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Bitter Creek's main street, turning the dust to gold and the storefronts to dark silhouettes. Marshal Eli Boone had been riding since dawn, his horse picking its way through the mountain pass with the careful gait of an animal that knew its rider's limitations. Eli's left leg ached with every step, a permanent reminder of the day 5 years back when a cattle rustler's bullet had shattered his knee and ended his career as a U.S. Marshal in any official capacity. He still wore the badge, but now it was more courtesy than authority, a relic of a life that had moved on without him. He was 63 years old, though some days he felt twice that. His hair had gone completely white, and his face bore the deep lines of a man who'd spent most of his life squinting into the sun and facing down trouble. But his eyes remained sharp, the color of cold creek water, and they missed very little. Bitter Creek wasn't his destination. He was headed to Silver City, 3 days' ride west, to testify at a trial. An old colleague had asked him to come, to speak about a man they'd both known, and Eli had agreed, because that's what you did. You showed up for the people who mattered. But his horse needed rest, and so did he. And Bitter Creek had a reputation as a decent enough place to water your mount and get a hot meal. That reputation, Eli would soon learn, was built on lies as carefully constructed as the false storefronts that lined the street. He saw her as he was tying his horse to the rail outside the hotel. At first, she was just another figure in the morning bustle, merchants opening their shops, women with baskets heading to the general store, men gathering outside the saloon, even at this early hour. But something about the way she stood, perfectly still, while everyone else moved around her, caught his attention. She was thin, painfully so, in a dress that had once been fine, but was now faded and patched. Her dark hair was pulled back severely from a face that would have been handsome, if not for the hollowness in her cheeks and the shadows under her eyes. She couldn't have been more than 40, but hardship had aged her beyond her years. At her feet sat a brown and white mutt with intelligent eyes and a tail that wagged hopefully, despite the circumstances. And in her hands she held a piece of cardboard, the writing on it careful and deliberate. "Good dog, $50. Please help." Eli had seen desperate people before. In his years as a lawman, he'd encountered every shade of human misery and degradation. But there was something in this woman's bearing that spoke of a different kind of desperation, not the frantic desperation of someone who'd given up, but the quiet desperation of someone who was still fighting to maintain their dignity, even as everything else fell away. He watched as people passed her by. Some averted their eyes. Others glanced at her with expressions that ranged from pity to contempt. A few whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Not one stopped to ask about the dog or offer help. The dog itself seemed oblivious to being for sale. It sat with perfect patience, occasionally looking up at the woman with such obvious devotion that Eli felt something tighten in his chest. Whatever else this woman had lost, she still had loyalty. The kind you couldn't buy or steal. Eli approached slowly, his limp more pronounced after hours in the saddle. The woman's eyes tracked his movement, wary but not afraid. Up close, he could see that her hands trembled slightly as she held the sign, and that her dress, despite being clean, was worn through at the elbows. "That's a fine-looking dog," Eli said, his voice gravelly from disuse. "He hadn't spoken to anyone since yesterday afternoon. He's loyal," the woman replied. Her voice was steady, though Eli could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "Good with children. Doesn't bark much. Smart enough to learn quick." Eli nodded, studying not the dog but the woman. "You selling him because you want to or because you have to?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment Eli thought she might tell him to mind his own business. Instead, she said, "Does it matter?" "Might," Eli said. "To me, anyway." The woman looked at him properly then, taking in his white hair, his weathered face, the badge on his vest that had dulled with age and wear. Something in her expression shifted, not hope exactly, but a kind of weary recognition. She'd seen enough of life to know that most men didn't ask questions like that unless they meant something by it. "I have to," she said quietly, "and that's all I'm willing to say about it." Eli respected that. A person's troubles were their own business unless they chose to share them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins. "There's a restaurant 2 doors down. Martha's place. She makes a decent breakfast. Why don't you take this? Get yourself some food." "I'm not asking for charity," the woman cut him off, her voice sharp despite its quietness. "I'm selling my dog. If you want to help, buy him. If not, move along." Eli studied her for a long moment. Pride, she still had that at least. In his experience, pride was often the last thing people let go of, and sometimes it was the only thing that kept them standing. "Fair enough," he said. He put the coins back in his pocket. "But I'm not in the market for a dog. Already got more responsibilities than I can handle." The woman's expression didn't change, but he saw her shoulders sag just slightly. She nodded once, accepting his refusal with the same quiet dignity she seemed to carry like armor. Eli should have walked away then. He had his own business to attend to, his own destination to reach. But something kept him rooted to that spot on the dusty street, something that had nothing to do with the dog and everything to do with the woman holding the sign. "Name's Eli Boone," he said. "I'm a marshal, or was. Still carry the badge for what it's worth these days." The woman hesitated, then said, "Mabel Hart." "Mrs. Hart," Eli acknowledged. "You mind if I ask what brought you to this particular street corner with that particular sign?" Mabel's eyes narrowed slightly. "You said you weren't interested in buying the dog." "I'm not. But I am interested in why a woman who clearly values her pride is willing to sell the only companion she seems to have left." For a moment Mabel didn't respond. The morning bustle continued around them, a wagon rolling past, horses stamping, voices calling out greetings and conducting business. Then she said, "You really want to know?" "I do. My husband found silver 3 years ago, up in the hills about 5 miles from here. Good vein, rich enough to set us up for life. He filed the claim, got it registered proper, came home that night and told me we were going to be fine, that our struggles were over." Her voice remained steady, but Eli could hear the pain beneath it. "He died 2 weeks later, gave in at the mine." Eli waited, knowing there was more. "After he died, everything started disappearing. First the claim. Someone showed up with papers saying Edward had signed it over before he died. Then the mine equipment, the supplies, even the deed to our house. Every piece of paper that proved what was ours just vanished. The bank said we had debts I'd never heard of. The land office said the property had been sold for back taxes." She paused, her grip tightening on the sign. "Within 6 months I had nothing. No house, no claim, no proof that any of it had ever belonged to us. And folks around here?" Eli asked, already suspecting the answer. "Most think I'm crazy, that I'm making it up, that Edward never found anything, that I'm a widow who lost her mind along with her husband." Her voice hardened. "Some know better but won't say so." Eli glanced around the street, noting the way people gave Mabel a wide berth, the way conversations seemed to quiet when she was near. "Who handled the paperwork?" "After your husband died?" "Town clerk. Man named Vernon Briggs. He said he was just following the law, recording what was filed proper." Mabel's eyes met Eli's, but every document that took something from me had his stamp on it. There it was. The shape of corruption, familiar as an old scar. Eli had seen it before in a dozen towns, small-time officials using their positions to rob people who couldn't fight back. Usually it was petty theft, nickel-and-dime schemes. But this sounded bigger, more organized. Why not take it to the sheriff? Eli asked. Mabel's laugh was bitter. The sheriff? Marshal, the sheriff bought Edward's mine equipment at auction. Got it for 10 cents on the dollar. You think he's interested in hearing my complaints? Eli felt the old familiar stirring, the one that had made him a lawman in the first place. It was the feeling that came when he saw injustice being done to someone who couldn't defend themselves. Age and injury hadn't taken that from him, though sometimes he wished they had. Life would be simpler if he could learn to just mind his own business. This Vernon Briggs, Eli said carefully. He got an office? Next to the land office, across from the bank. Why? Just curious. Eli tipped his hat to her. Mrs. Hart, I hope you find a buyer for your dog. He looks like a good animal. He started to turn away, then paused. One more thing. That sign of yours, the handwriting's real clear. Careful like, you do that yourself. Mabel nodded slowly. I was a school teacher before I married Edward. Writing was part of the job. Shows, Eli said. That's the kind of detail that matters. He left her there on the street corner, the dog still sitting patiently at her feet, and made his way toward the hotel. But his mind was already working, turning over what she'd told him, fitting the pieces together. A silver strike, a convenient death, documents disappearing, and a town clerk with his stamp on everything. It was a story he'd heard before in variations, but that didn't make it any less wrong. Inside the hotel, the clerk was a young man with slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Help you, mister? Need a room for the night. Maybe 2, depending. Sign here. The clerk pushed a ledger across the counter. That'll be $2. Eli signed and paid, noting that the ledger was nearly empty. For a town of Bitter Creek's size, the hotel should have been busier. Town usually this quiet? The clerk shrugged. Quiet enough. We get by. Saw a woman outside. Selling a dog. The clerk's expression soured. Mabel Hart. She's always out there with some story or another. Best to ignore her. That so? Everybody knows she's touched in the head. Lost her husband and lost her mind right after. Happens sometimes with widows. Eli accepted the room key without comment. He'd learned long ago that the fastest way to learn what people really thought was to let them talk without pushing. The clerk clearly had more to say, and sure enough, after a moment he continued. She used to be respectable. Husband worked hard, they had a decent place up on the hill. Then he died in that mine accident, and she started claiming all sorts of nonsense. Silver strike, stolen claims, conspiracies. Sheriff tried to help her at first, but she just kept getting more insistent. Now folks mostly feel sorry for her, but what can you do? Not much, I suppose, Eli said neutrally. Exactly. Tragedy, but you can't help someone who won't accept reality. Eli took his key and climbed the stairs to his room. It was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. From this vantage point, he could see Mabel still standing at her corner, the sign still in her hands. As he watched, a well-dressed man approached her, not to inquire about the dog, but to speak to her directly. Even from a distance, Eli could see the tension in the exchange. The man gestured sharply, his posture aggressive. Mabel stood her ground, not backing away, but not engaging either. After a moment, the man stalked off, and Mabel remained where she was, unmoved. Eli sat on the edge of the bed and removed his hat, running a hand through his white hair. He should rest, then ride on tomorrow as planned. Mabel Hart's troubles weren't his troubles. He'd testified at enough trials, investigated enough crimes, seen enough injustice to know that he couldn't fix them all, especially not now, with a bad leg and no official authority beyond a badge that carried less weight with each passing year. But he also knew himself well enough to recognize when something had gotten under his skin. That sign Mabel held, written in careful schoolteacher script. That dog sitting loyal despite everything. That quiet dignity in the face of a town that had turned its back. Sometimes, Eli thought, mercy and justice weren't so different. Sometimes they were the same thing wearing different names. He stood and walked back to the window. Mabel was still there, sign still raised. And Eli Boone, despite every reasonable argument against it, knew he wasn't leaving Bitter Creek tomorrow after all. The incident that changed everything happened just after noon. Eli had spent the morning walking the town, taking its measure the way a lawman learns to do, noting who talked to whom, which buildings looked prosperous and which didn't, where the power seemed to concentrate. Bitter Creek had the bones of a decent community, but something about it felt hollow. The conversation stopped when he passed. Eyes followed him with a wariness that spoke of secrets kept and questions unwelcome. He'd found the town clerk's office easily enough. It sat between the land office and a lawyer's suite, a small brick building with Vernon Briggs, town clerk and recorder, painted on the window in neat gold letters. Through the glass, Eli could see filing cabinets lining the walls, shelves packed with ledgers and documents. The machinery of bureaucracy that could make or break a person's life with the stroke of a pen. Briggs himself was visible at a desk, a heavy-set man in his 50s, with thinning hair and the soft hands of someone who'd never done hard labor. He was speaking with another man, their heads bent close over papers spread across the desk. Something about the conversation's intensity made Eli pause. Both men looked up as his shadow fell across the window, and their expressions shifted: surprise, calculation, wariness. The other man, tall and expensively dressed, gathered the papers quickly and left through a back door. Eli filed the observation away and continued his walk. By midday, he'd formed a picture of Bitter Creek's power structure: Mayor Augustus Flynn, who owned the bank and half the commercial properties; Sheriff Dale Ketchum, who'd been appointed by Flynn 3 years back; Vernon Briggs, who controlled all official records; and a handful of businessmen who seemed to orbit these three like moons around a planet. And at the edges of this tidy arrangement stood Mabel Hart, an inconvenient reminder of something the town wanted forgotten. Eli found her still at her corner, though she looked more worn than she had that morning. The dog remained at her feet, patient as a saint. The sign was beginning to droop in her hands. "Mrs. Hart," Eli said by way of greeting. "You been standing here all day?" "Where else would I be?" Her voice carried the flat exhaustion of someone past the point of caring. "You could be eating, resting, taking care of yourself." "I could do a lot of things, Marshal, but none of them put food in my stomach or a roof over my head." She gestured with the sign. "This is what I have left. My dog and my pride. I'm selling one to keep the other." Eli was about to respond when a commotion erupted down the street. Raised voices, a woman's scream, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. He turned to see a crowd forming near the general store, people rushing toward whatever was happening. His lawman's instincts kicked in despite the years and the injury. He started toward the disturbance, his hand automatically checking for the Colt at his hip. Behind him, he heard Mabel's voice. "Marshal, don't—" But he was already moving. The crowd parted as he approached, and Eli saw what had caused the uproar. A woman lay on the boardwalk, her basket of groceries scattered around her. She was conscious but dazed, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Standing over her was a man in a fine suit, the same man Eli had seen leaving Briggs's office earlier. Mayor Augustus Flynn, Eli realized, recognizing him from a wanted poster he'd seen years back. Before the man had apparently gone respectable. "She walked right into me," Flynn was saying loudly to the crowd. "Clumsy fool. Not my fault she can't watch where she's going." The woman on the ground was trying to gather her spilled goods, her hands shaking. "I'm sorry, Mr. Flynn, I didn't see you. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix my suit jacket." Flynn brushed at his sleeve where the woman's basket had struck him. "You'll pay for the cleaning. And watch yourself next time, or you'll answer to the sheriff." Eli stepped forward, his badge catching the sunlight. "Ma'am, you hurt?" The woman looked up at him with frightened eyes. "No, sir. I'm fine. Just clumsy is all." "Didn't look clumsy to me." Eli's voice was calm, but carried weight. "Looked like you got knocked down." Flynn's eyes narrowed as he noticed Eli for the first time. "And who might you be?" "Marshal Eli Boone, and you'd be Mayor Flynn unless I miss my guess." "I am." Flynn's tone shifted, became more cordial but no less hostile. "Well, Marshal, this is a local matter. Nothing that requires federal attention. I'm not federal anymore. Just observing. Eli bent down and helped the woman gather her groceries, his knee protesting the movement. Up close, he could see the fear in her face, the way she kept glancing at Flynn as if expecting another blow. "Ma'am, you sure you're all right?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." She clutched her basket and hurried away before Eli could ask anything else. Flynn watched her go with a smirk. Nervous woman. Always has been. He turned his attention fully to Eli. "You're the marshal who checked into the hotel this morning." "Just passing through, I heard." "That was the plan. Still is, I hope. Bitter Creek is a quiet town. We'd like to keep it that way. Don't need any outside interference in our affairs. It wasn't quite a threat, but it was close." Eli straightened, meeting Flynn's gaze steadily. "Just looking around. Haven't interfered with anything. See that you don't." Flynn adjusted his jacket and walked away, the crowd parting for him like water around a stone. Within moments, the street had returned to normal, people going about their business, as if nothing had happened, except it had happened. Eli had seen it, and more importantly, he'd seen how the town had reacted. With fear, with silence, with the kind of resigned acceptance that spoke of power long unchallenged. He turned back toward where he'd left Mabel and stopped short. She wasn't alone anymore. 3 men surrounded her, their postures aggressive. One of them, a deputy, judging by his badge, was holding her sign, having apparently ripped it from her hands. The dog was on its feet now, growling low in its throat, positioned between Mabel and the men. Eli moved quickly despite his limp. As he approached, he heard the deputy's voice. "Told you last week. Mayor Flynn don't want you out here making the town look bad. You're disturbing the peace." "I'm standing on a public street," Mabel said, her voice steady despite the 3 men looming over her. "I'm not breaking any law. You're disturbing people." "That's enough." The deputy tore the sign in half and tossed the pieces into the dirt. "Now move along or I'll arrest you for vagrancy." "On what grounds?" Mabel demanded. "I'm not vagrant. I'm trying to earn money by selling a dog nobody wants." The deputy's tone was cruel. "Face it, Mabel, nobody believes your stories anymore. Nobody cares. You're just making a fool of yourself." The other 2 men laughed. One of them reached down as if to grab Mabel's arm, and the dog lunged forward with a snarl, snapping at his hand. The man jerked back with a curse. "That animal just attacked me," he shouted. "Deputy, that dog's dangerous. Should be put down." The deputy's hand went to his gun. "Might be you're right. That won't be necessary." Eli's voice cut through the tension like a knife. All 3 men turned to look at him, and the deputy's hand moved away from his weapon. "I'll take the dog." "What?" The deputy looked confused. "The dog. I'll buy him." Eli pulled out a $50 gold piece and held it up. "Mrs. Hart, you still selling?" Mabel stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Eli thought she might refuse out of pride or stubbornness. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm selling." Eli walked past the 3 men and handed Mabel the coin. Their fingers touched briefly as she took it, and he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition. An acknowledgement of what he was really doing. He bent down and picked up the torn pieces of her sign from the dirt. "You wrote this careful." "Shame to see it treated with disrespect." He looked at the deputy. "This how Bitter Creek treats its citizens? By destroying their property?" The deputy's face flushed. "She's not a citizen. She don't own nothing in this town. She owns this gold piece now. And she owned that sign." Eli folded the torn cardboard carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Seems to me that's property worth respecting." "Marshal," the deputy said, his voice hard, "you're sticking your nose where it don't belong." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just conducting a transaction. Either way, it's done." Eli looked down at the dog, which had stopped growling and was now watching him with intelligent, assessing eyes. "Come on, boy. You're with me now." The dog looked at Mabel as if asking permission. She nodded once, and the animal moved to Eli's side, pressing against his leg with surprising gentleness. The 3 men stood there for a moment longer, clearly wanting to do something, but uncertain what. Finally, the deputy spat into the dirt. "This ain't over," he said to Mabel. "Mayor hears about this, there'll be consequences." There usually are, Mabel replied quietly. The men left, their boots heavy on the wooden boardwalk. Eli waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. You got somewhere to go tonight, Mrs. Hart? I'll manage. That's not what I asked. Mabel looked at him for a long moment. There's a boarding house at the edge of town. Mrs. Chen runs it. She hasn't forgotten what kindness looks like, even if everyone else has. I can get a room there for a few days with what you paid me. Good. Eli glanced down at the dog, then back at Mabel. This animal got a name? Scout. Scout, Eli nodded. Fitz, Mrs. Hart, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Ask. Your husband's mine. The one where he found the silver. You know where it is? Mabel's eyes widened slightly. Yes, but it's been worked over. Cleaned out. There's nothing left worth finding. Maybe not silver, Eli said, but maybe something else. Something that proves your story. He paused. I'd like to see it. Tomorrow, if you're willing. Why? You're just passing through. You said so yourself. I did say that. Eli looked down at the torn pieces of sign in his hand, at the careful handwriting of a woman who'd once been a schoolteacher and was now reduced to selling her only friend for survival. But plans change. Sometimes a man sees something that needs setting right, and he can't just ride away from it. Even if he should. Mabel studied his face, searching for something, sincerity perhaps, or strength, or simply whether he meant what he said. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. Tomorrow morning then, sun up, meet me at the boarding house. I'll be there. She walked away, her spine straight despite everything, and Eli watched her go. Beside him, Scout sat down and looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too knowing for a dog. Well, boy, Eli said quietly, looks like we just bought ourselves some trouble. Scout's tail wagged once, as if to say he'd known that from the start. Eli spent the evening in his hotel room with Scout lying at his feet and the torn pieces of Mabel's sign spread out on the small table. He'd fitted them back together carefully, studying the handwriting as if it might reveal something beyond the simple message. The letters were precise, well-formed, the work of someone accustomed to teaching others to write. Someone who took pride in doing things properly. He thought about what he'd seen in Bitter Creek so far, the fear in people's eyes, the way the crowd had scattered when Mayor Flynn spoke, the casual cruelty of the deputy destroying Mabel's sign, and underneath it all, the hint of something larger, a system designed to strip people of their property while maintaining a veneer of legality. Eli had seen such systems before. They thrived in frontier towns where federal oversight was thin and local power could consolidate without check. The pattern was always the same. Find vulnerable people, use bureaucratic manipulation to take what they owned, and silence anyone who complained by turning the community against them. Make the victim look crazy or criminal, and no one would ask questions. The question was how to prove it. Mabel's word alone wouldn't be enough. He'd need documents, witnesses, a trail of evidence that couldn't be dismissed. And he'd need to be careful. Men like Flynn didn't build power without being willing to defend it. Scout stirred and raised his head, ears pricked. A moment later, Eli heard footsteps in the hallway outside his room. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped at his door. A knock followed, firm but not aggressive. Eli's hand moved to his Colt. Who is it? Name's Chen. I run the boarding house. Eli opened the door carefully. The man standing there was Chinese. Perhaps 60 years old, with iron-grey hair and eyes that had seen their share of hardship. He held his hat in his hands, his posture respectful but not subservient. Mr. Chen, Eli said. Something I can help you with? May I come in? What I have to say isn't for the hallway. Eli stepped back and let the man enter. Chen glanced at Scout, who watched him with interest but no hostility, then at the pieces of sign on the table. His expression tightened. You bought Mabel Hart's dog, Chen said. It wasn't a question, I did. Why? Eli considered the question. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Chen nodded slowly. My wife and I, we came to Bitter Creek 15 years ago. We worked hard, saved money, bought our boarding house. We've seen a lot in those years. Good people come and go. Bad people too, he paused. Mabel Hart is good people. What they've done to her is wrong. So I'm learning. Are you planning to do something about it? Eli met the older man's gaze steadily. Depends on what something means. I'm not a marshal anymore, not officially. I have no authority here, but you have a conscience. I can see it in how you look at things. How you helped that woman on the street today, when Flynn knocked her down. How you saved Mabel's dog from being shot. Chen sat down in the room's single chair without being invited, and Eli found he didn't mind. My wife gave Mabel a room tonight, free of charge. We've been giving her rooms when we can, meals when she'll accept them. But we're just two people. We can't stand against Flynn and his people alone. Tell me about Flynn, Eli said. Chen's expression darkened. Augustus Flynn showed up in Bitter Creek 7 years ago with money and ambition. He bought the bank, then started buying properties when people couldn't pay their loans. Within 2 years, he owned half the town. 3 years ago, he got himself appointed mayor. Since then, things have changed. Changed how? People who oppose him lose their businesses to mysterious fires or sudden tax liens. Others just disappear, move away in the middle of the night, folks say. And every time someone loses property, Flynn or his associates seem to be there to buy it up cheap. Chen leaned forward. Edward Hart wasn't the first to find silver in these hills. He was just the most recent. And like the others before him, he died before he could profit from it. Eli felt cold settle in his gut. How many others? 3 that I know of for certain. Maybe more. All of them found claims. All of them filed proper with the town clerk. And all of them ended up dead or gone, with their claims somehow transferred to Flynn's mining company. And nobody's investigated? Who would? The sheriff works for Flynn. The judge comes up from Silver City once a month, and he's Flynn's poker partner. The federal marshal's office is 3 days' ride away, and nobody's going to make that trip based on suspicions and gossip. Chen's voice was bitter. Flynn's built himself a little kingdom here, and he's smart about it. He doesn't break the law, he uses it. Through Vernon Briggs, the town clerk, yes, Briggs is the key. Every document that matters goes through his office. Property transfers, mining claims, death certificates, tax records. If something needs to disappear or be created, Briggs does it. Always legal, always properly stamped and filed. Eli walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. Bitter Creek looked peaceful in the lamplight, almost idyllic. But he was learning that appearances meant nothing. The rot was underneath in the paperwork and the quiet intimidation. In the system itself. Mrs. Hart's taking me to her husband's mine tomorrow, Eli said. I want to see it for myself. Be careful, Chen stood. Flynn has eyes everywhere. If he thinks you're helping Mabel, he'll come after you too. You're not a young man anymore, Marshal. And you're alone. Eli turned from the window. Maybe, but I'm not helpless. And I'm getting the sense that I'm not quite as alone as Flynn might think. Chen smiled slightly. My wife and I, we can't do much, but we can listen. We hear things, and we remember. He moved toward the door, then paused. There's a man who works at the land office. Name's Warren Hayes. He's young, only been here 2 years. He's seen things that bother him, but he's too scared to speak up. If you can get him to talk, he might tell you about the filing system Briggs uses, how the documents really move through the system. Where can I find him? He lives above the land office. Drinks at the saloon most nights, but alone. Sits in the back corner like he's trying to disappear. Chen opened the door. One more thing, Marshal. Mabel Hart is proud. She won't accept help that looks like charity, but she will accept partnership. If you're going to help her, make her part of it. Let her fight for herself. I will, Eli promised. After Chen left, Eli sat at the table and took out his notebook, a habit from his years as a lawman. He wrote down names and connections, drawing lines between people and events. Flynn at the center, Briggs as his instrument, the sheriff as enforcement. And at the edges, vulnerable people whose property had mysteriously changed hands. A pattern emerged on the page, clear and damning. But patterns weren't proof. He'd need more. He'd need documents, testimony, something that could stand up in a court that wasn't corrupted. Scout stood and stretched, then padded over to rest his head on Eli's knee. The dog's brown eyes looked up at him with absolute trust, and Eli felt the weight of that trust settle on his shoulders, along with everything else. Tomorrow we start asking questions, Eli told the dog quietly. "And we better hope we ask the right ones." Outside, Bitter Creek slept, unaware that the foundations of its corruption were about to be tested by a broken-down marshal with a borrowed dog and a stubborn refusal to let injustice stand unchallenged. Dawn came cold and clear to Bitter Creek. Eli met Mabel outside. Mrs. Chen's boarding house as agreed, Scout at his heel. Mabel looked better than she had the day before. Rested, fed, wearing the same worn dress, but with her hair neatly braided and her shoulders straight. The gold piece Eli had given her had brought her dignity back, at least temporarily. "Marshal," she greeted him. "Mrs. Hart. You ready?" "I am." She glanced down at Scout. "He looks good with you, like he knows he's got a purpose again." They walked to the stable where Eli had boarded his horse. Mabel had no mount of her own, so Eli arranged for a rental, a gentle mare that didn't mind double weight. The stable owner, an old man with kind eyes, waved off payment. "Mabel Hart don't owe me nothing," he said quietly. "Edward was a good man. What happened to him, to her, it ain't right." It was the first time Eli had heard someone in Bitter Creek openly sympathize with Mabel. He noted it, filing the information away. Not everyone had turned their back on her. Some people still remembered what was right, even if fear kept them silent. The ride to the mine took just over an hour, following a trail that wound up into the hills east of town. The landscape was beautiful in its harshness. Sage and juniper, red rock formations, distant peaks still capped with snow. Scout ranged ahead, moving with the easy confidence of a dog who knew how to travel rough country. Mabel rode behind Eli in silence for most of the journey. Finally, as they neared the mine site, she spoke. "I haven't been up here since Edward died. Couldn't bear it. We don't have to do this if it's too hard. No." Her voice was firm. "I need to do this. Need to see it with someone who'll believe me." The mine entrance was a dark slash in the hillside, partially collapsed. Support timbers lay scattered around the opening, and the ground was disturbed where equipment had been removed. A faded wooden sign, hand-painted, still hung from a post near the entrance. "Heart's Hope." Mabel dismounted and stood looking at the sign, her hand touching it gently. "Edward made that our first day here. Said it was our hope for the future," her voice caught. "He was so proud." Eli dismounted more carefully, his bad legs stiff from the ride. He studied the mine entrance, the collapsed timbers, the way the ground had been disturbed. "When did the cave-in happen?" 3 weeks after Edward filed the claim. He was working alone. We couldn't afford to hire help yet. I found him when I brought his lunch up." She closed her eyes briefly. The entrance had collapsed. "Took me 2 hours to dig him out, but it was too late." "I'm sorry," Eli said, and meant it. Mabel nodded, accepting his sympathy. Then she moved past the mine entrance, walking along the hillside. "There's something I need to show you. I found it when I came back a month after Edward died, after everything had been taken from me. This way." She led him to a small shed about 50 yards from the mine, half hidden by juniper. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and the inside was dusty and empty, except for a workbench and some scattered tools. Mabel went straight to the workbench and knelt down. Edward was methodical. He kept records of everything, samples, assay results, daily progress reports. She reached under the workbench and pulled at a loose board. It came free, revealing a hollow space beneath. "I thought they'd found this, thought they'd taken everything. But when I came back that last time, I checked, and it was still here." From the hollow, she pulled out a leather satchel, cracked with age and exposure. Inside was a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth. Mabel unwrapped them carefully and spread them on the workbench. Eli moved closer, and Scout pressed against his leg, sensing the importance of the moment. The papers were Edward Hart's records, daily logs written in careful hand, noting progress in the mine. Assay results from a Silver City testing office showing high-grade silver ore. And most importantly, a copy of the original mining claim filing, complete with stamps and signatures, including Vernon Briggs's signature as town clerk, certifying the claim in Edward Hart's name. Eli picked up the claim document carefully. "This is dated 3 years ago, April 15th, 1884, Mabel confirmed. Edward filed it the same day he struck silver. Went straight to town, filed proper with Briggs, came home and told me we were set for life. And when he died, May 7th, cave in. Mabel's voice was steady, but Eli could hear the effort it took. By the time I buried him and dealt with the grief, 2 weeks had passed. When I went to Briggs to ask about transferring the claim to me, he showed me a different document, dated May 5th, 2 days before Edward died. It showed Edward had sold the claim to Flynn's mining company for $1,000. Eli studied the paper in his hand. But you have this copy? The original filing, which Briggs says is fraudulent. He claims Edward must have filed a false initial claim and then corrected it later. Made me sound like I was trying to defraud the town. Mabel's bitterness was palpable. Who are people going to believe? The town clerk with his official stamps and records, or the crazy widow with a piece of paper she found in a shed? Eli understood the problem immediately. Without corroboration, this document proved nothing. It would be Mabel's word against Briggs's, and in a town controlled by Flynn, that battle was already lost. But it was a start. It was something concrete, something that could potentially be investigated. He looked at the assay results next. They showed consistent high-grade silver ore samples dated over 3 weeks in April 1884, all tested by the same Silver City assayer, a man named Thomas Garrett. This assayer, Eli said. He's still in business? I don't know. I never thought to check. Why? Because if he kept his own records, they'd show Edward Hart bringing in samples to be tested. That's independent verification that your husband had a real claim, not a fraudulent one. Eli folded the papers carefully. Mrs. Hart, I need to take these. He stopped abruptly. Scout had gone rigid, his ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The dog was staring back down the trail they'd ridden up. Someone's coming, Eli said quietly. He moved to the shed's doorway, his hand on his colt. Sure enough, he could hear hoofbeats now, multiple horses moving at a steady pace up the trail. Mabel came to stand beside him, her face pale but composed. That'll be Flynn's men. He has people watching the trails. Someone must have seen us leave town. How many men does he have? 6, maybe 8 who work for him directly. More who'll do what he says if pressed. The horses came into view around a bend in the trail. 3 riders, led by the deputy who'd torn Mabel's sign yesterday. They saw Eli and Mabel standing by the shed and spurred their horses forward. The deputy reined in hard, his horse stamping and blowing. Marshal Boone, Mrs. Hart, this is private property. You're trespassing. Private property? Eli kept his voice calm. This was the Hart claim. Owned by Mrs. Hart's late husband, was being the important word. This claim was sold legally 3 years ago. It belongs to the Bitter Creek Mining Company now. That means you're trespassing, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We were just looking around, Eli said. No harm in that. There is when you're on private property. The deputy's hand rested on his gun. The 2 men with him fanned out slightly, flanking him. Now mount up and head back to town, both of you. And Marshal, I'd suggest you get on your way to Silver City like you planned. Your business here is done. Eli met the deputy's gaze steadily. What if I say it's not? Then I'd say you're asking for trouble you don't need. You got no authority here, no jurisdiction. You're just an old man with a badge that don't mean nothing anymore. The deputy's smile was ugly. Go home, Marshal. While you still can. Eli felt anger rise in his chest, hot and familiar. But he pushed it down. Getting into a gunfight with 3 men on a remote hillside would help no one, least of all Mabel. And he had what he'd come for, Edward Hart's records. Hidden safely in the satchel now tucked under his coat. All right, Eli said. We're leaving. No need for trouble. The deputy looked disappointed but nodded. Smart choice. Now get moving. Eli and Mabel mounted up and rode back down the trail, the 3 men following at a distance to make sure they left. Scout trotted alongside, occasionally glancing back at their escort with distrust clear in his canine eyes. They didn't speak until they were back on the main road to Bitter Creek, their shadows following behind them. Then Mabel said quietly, they knew we were going there. Someone told them, looks that way, which means someone's been watching me. Maybe watching you too, now that you've involved yourself. Eli nodded. He'd expected as much. Flynn hadn't built his operation without keeping eyes on potential threats. Makes sense. But it also tells us something. What? That we're making them nervous. People who aren't worried don't send 3 armed men to run off an old lawman and a widow looking at an abandoned mine. He patted the satchel under his coat. And now we've got something they don't know we have. That gives us an advantage. Mabel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Marshal, for believing me, for helping." "You didn't have to." "Maybe not," Eli agreed. "But some things you can't walk away from. Not and still be able to look at yourself in the mirror come morning." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence. And Eli found himself thinking about the papers hidden under his coat and what they might mean. Evidence. Not proof yet, but evidence. A thread he could pull to start unraveling Flynn's carefully constructed web of corruption. The question was whether he could pull it fast enough before Flynn decided that an old marshal with a borrowed dog had become too dangerous to tolerate. Eli spent the afternoon in the hotel saloon, nursing a whiskey and watching. The place was half full, mostly miners and ranch hands, with a few businessmen gathered in the back playing cards. He'd learned long ago that saloons were where men let their guards down, where truth leaked out in casual conversation and unguarded moments. Scout lay under his table, patient and quiet. The dog had drawn some attention when they'd entered, but after the bartender vouched for Eli being a paying customer, no one objected. Now Scout was just part of the furniture, easily ignored. Warren Hayes came in just after 6, exactly as Chen had said he would. He was young, maybe 25, with the look of an educated man who'd come west seeking opportunity and found something else instead. He took his customary corner table and ordered beer, then sat hunched over it like a man trying to make himself invisible. Eli let him settle in before approaching. "Mr. Hayes, mind if I join you?" Hayes looked up, startled. His eyes flicked to Eli's badge, and fear rippled across his face. "I don't want any trouble." "Neither do I, just want to talk." Eli sat down without waiting for permission, noting how Hayes's hands trembled slightly around his beer mug. "I understand you work at the land office." "I do. So what?" "So I'm curious about how things work in Bitter Creek, how property gets transferred, how claims get filed." Eli kept his voice conversational, non-threatening. "Seems like there's a lot of paperwork that flows through this town. That's not my business. I just file what Mr. Briggs tells me to file, Briggs being the town clerk." "You know he is." Hayes took a long drink of his beer, his eyes darting around the room as if checking who might be listening. "Look, Marshal, I heard about you asking questions. Word gets around, and I'm telling you straight, I can't help you. I got a job, I got responsibilities. I can't afford to lose them." Eli studied the young man. "Fear, yes, but also something else. Guilt, maybe. The look of someone who knew things were wrong, but felt powerless to do anything about it. I'm not asking you to risk your job. Just asking you to talk to me about how the system works. Educational purposes. There's nothing educational about it. Briggs runs the town clerk's office. I work in the land office. We coordinate on property transfers. That's all. And when someone files a mining claim, how does that work?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "They file with Briggs. He records it, gives them a certified copy. The land office gets a duplicate for our records. And if that claim needs to be transferred, say if someone sells their claim, same process. Seller and buyer sign transfer documents in front of Briggs. He certifies them, records the new owner, sends copies to us and to the county recorder in Silver City." Eli nodded slowly. "What if the seller is dead? How does that work?" Hayes went very still. "Marshal, I really can't. I'm just asking hypothetically. How would a dead man's claim get transferred?" For a moment, Hayes didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "Through estate settlement. If there's a will, the executor handles it. If not, it goes through probate. Either way, Briggs has to certify the transfer is legal before we can record it. And if Briggs says a dead man signed transfer papers before he died, who verifies that?" Hayes looked down at his beer. "Nobody. Briggs is the certifying authority. If he says it's legitimate, it's legitimate. That's how the system works. Seems like a system that could be abused. I wouldn't know about that." But Hayes's voice carried no conviction. He drained his beer and stood up. "I have to go." Mr. Hayes, Eli's voice stopped him. 3 years ago, a man named Edward Hart filed a silver claim. 3 weeks later, he died in a mine collapse. Shortly after that, his claim was transferred to the Bitter Creek Mining Company. You remember that? Hayes's face had gone pale. I remember a lot of transactions. I can't speak to specific ones. Do you remember Edward Hart's widow coming to the land office, asking to see the records, asking how her husband's claim ended up in someone else's hands? Marshal, please. Hayes's voice was barely above a whisper. You don't know what you're asking. You don't know what happens to people who ask too many questions in this town. Then tell me. Help me understand. Hayes looked around the saloon again, his fear palpable. Then he leaned down and spoke quietly, urgently. There's a ledger. Briggs keeps it in his office, locked in the bottom drawer of his desk. It's not the official record, it's his private ledger. The one that shows the real transactions before he files the official ones. He straightened up. That's all I can tell you. That's all I know. And if anyone finds out I said even that much, I'm a dead man. He left quickly, nearly running out of the saloon. Eli sat back and considered what he'd learned. A private ledger. That made sense. Briggs would need to keep track of his manipulation somehow, and he'd be arrogant enough to think his locked desk drawer was secure enough. Scout stirred under the table and rested his head on Eli's boot, a gesture of comfort, as if the dog sensed the weight of what they were facing. Eli finished his whiskey and stood preparing to leave. As he did, he noticed Mayor Flynn entering the saloon with 2 men flanking him. Flynn saw Eli immediately, and his expression darkened. He made his way across the room, his men following like shadows. Marshal Boone. Flynn's voice was cold.
I heard you took a ride up to Hart's Hope this morning.
Trespassing on private property, just looking around. No harm done. There's plenty of harm in a federal marshal sticking his nose into local business. Flynn stepped closer, his voice dropping. You need to understand something. Bitter Creek takes care of its own affairs. We don't need outside interference. Whatever that crazy woman told you, whatever lies she's spinning, they're not your concern. I'll decide what's my concern. Will you? Flynn's smile was dangerous. You're not a young man anymore, Marshal. You're crippled, alone, and a long way from any help. Accidents happen, especially to people who don't know when to mind their own business. It was a direct threat, more blatant than Eli had expected. Flynn was confident, secure in his power. Too secure, maybe. Men who felt untouchable made mistakes. I'll keep that in mind, Eli said evenly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to. He started to move past Flynn, but one of the mayor's men blocked his path. The man was large, with the scarred knuckles of a brawler and mean eyes that suggested he enjoyed his work. The mayor's not done talking to you, the man said. Scout emerged from under the table, positioning himself between Eli and Flynn's men. The dog's hackles were up, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. The sound was primal, threatening, and every head in the saloon turned to watch. Easy, Scout, Eli said quietly. Then to Flynn, I'd suggest your man step aside. My dog's protective, and I'd hate for anyone to get hurt. Flynn studied the tableau for a moment, the old marshal, the dangerous dog, the tension that was drawing every eye in the saloon. Finally, he gestured to his man to move. This isn't over, Boone. I expect not. Eli left the saloon with Scout at his heel, aware of every eye following him. Once outside, he stood in the evening air and let his heart rate slow. He'd faced down threats before, but he was older now, slower, and Flynn was right about one thing. He was alone. Except he wasn't. Not quite. He had Mabel fighting for her own justice. He had the Chens, quietly providing support. He had Warren Hayes, terrified but willing to share what he knew. And he had Scout, loyal beyond reason. More than that, he had Edward Hart's original claim documents and the knowledge of a private ledger that might contain the proof he needed. The pieces were coming together. The question was whether he could assemble them fast enough. Eli headed back to the hotel, his mind working through possibilities. Getting into Briggs's office wouldn't be easy. The clerk worked during the day, and the building was likely locked at night. He'd need a distraction, or an excuse, or simply the willingness to break the law he'd spent his life upholding. The irony wasn't lost on him. To expose corruption, he might have to become what he'd always fought against. But then again, sometimes justice and law weren't the same thing. Sometimes a man had to choose which one mattered more. Back in his room, Eli spread Edward Hart's documents on the table again and studied them by lamplight. The assayer's reports were detailed, professional. If Thomas Garrett was still in business in Silver City, he could provide testimony. But that would mean leaving Bitter Creek, and Eli had a feeling that leaving now would mean never coming back. Flynn would make sure of it. No, he needed to work faster. He needed that ledger Hayes had mentioned, and he needed to find a way to force Flynn's hand before Flynn decided to eliminate the threat Eli represented. Scout jumped up onto the bed, something Eli normally wouldn't allow, but tonight he let it pass. The dog circled twice and lay down, watching Eli with those knowing eyes. "Tomorrow," Eli told the dog quietly. "Tomorrow we make our move. One way or another, this comes to a head." Outside, Bitter Creek settled into night, and somewhere in the darkness, powerful men were making plans of their own. Morning brought clarity and a plan. Eli woke before dawn, his mind sharp despite the hours spent plotting late into the night. Scout was already awake, sitting by the window as if he'd been keeping watch while Eli slept. The plan was simple, which meant it had a chance of working. Eli would create a distraction, while someone else, someone the town wouldn't suspect, got into Briggs's office to find that private ledger. The question was who? Mabel was too obvious. Chen too cautious. Warren Hayes too frightened. He needed someone unexpected, someone with a legitimate reason to be in the town clerk's office. The answer came to him as he was shaving. The woman Flynn had knocked down on the street, the one who'd been too scared to press charges or even give her name. She'd been carrying groceries, which meant she ran a household. And households required paperwork, tax records, property documents, business licenses. Things that would naturally take someone to the clerk's office. Finding her took most of the morning. Eli walked the town with Scout, asking casual questions, following leads. A woman with a basket. Lives on the north end. Keeps to herself mostly. Finally, an older shopkeeper gave him a name and an address. Sarah Mitchell, widow who runs a boarding house for minors. The boarding house was modest but well kept. A 2-story frame building with clean windows and a swept porch. Eli knocked and waited, Scout sitting patiently beside him. Sarah Mitchell answered the door and immediately tried to close it when she saw who it was. "I told you I'm fine. I don't need any help. Mrs. Mitchell, please. I just want to talk." "About what?" "How Mayor Flynn knocked me down. How the whole town saw it and nobody said a word." Her voice was bitter. "I know how things work here, Marshal. Talking doesn't change anything. Maybe not. But listening might." Eli kept his voice gentle. "I'm not here to cause you trouble. I'm here because I think we might be able to help each other." Sarah hesitated, then opened the door wider. 5 minutes. That's all you get. Inside, the boarding house was clean and comfortable. Sarah led him to a small parlor and sat down, her posture rigid with tension. Eli took the chair across from her and Scout lay down between them, his presence somehow calming. "I know about the taxes," Eli said quietly. "The ones Flynn claims you owe. The ones that are about to cost you this boarding house." Sarah's face went white. "How did you—" "I've been asking questions, learning how things work in Bitter Creek, and I'm starting to see a pattern. Properties getting taken for mysterious debts, claims disappearing. Documents that prove ownership suddenly invalid." Eli leaned forward. "You're not the first person Flynn's targeted. You won't be the last, unless someone stops him. And you think that someone is you." Sarah's laugh was harsh. "You're one man, Marshal. An old man with a limp and a borrowed dog. What can you do against Flynn? More than you'd think. But I need help. I need someone who can get into the town clerk's office without raising suspicion. Someone with a legitimate reason to be looking at property records." Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes, followed quickly by fear. "No, absolutely not. If Flynn finds out, he won't find out if we're careful. And if we succeed, you get your boarding house free and clear. No more threats. No more looking over your shoulder. And if we fail, then we're no worse off than we are now." Sarah stood and walked to the window, staring out at her property, the building she'd worked so hard to maintain, the life she'd built after her husband died. "What would I have to do?" Eli explained his plan. It was straightforward. Sarah would go to Briggs's office to request copies of her property tax records, claiming she needed to verify the amounts owed. While Briggs was distracted, pulled away by a complaint Eli would file at the land office about his hotel accommodations, Sarah would search for the private ledger Hayes had mentioned. "She'd have maybe 5 minutes, 10 at most." "I can't," Sarah said when he finished. "I'm not brave like Mabel Hart. I don't have that kind of courage." "Courage isn't about being fearless," Eli said. "It's about being scared and doing what's right anyway. You've already shown more courage than most. You're still standing. You haven't left town or given up. That takes strength." Sarah turned from the window. "What makes you think there's even a ledger? What if it's just a rumor? Then we'll have wasted an afternoon. But if it exists, it could expose everything Flynn's been doing. Not just to you or Mabel, but to everyone he's robbed." For a long moment, Sarah didn't speak. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it. But if this goes wrong, if Flynn comes after me, he won't get the chance. I give you my word." They spent the next hour going over the plan in detail. Sarah would go to the clerk's office at 2 o'clock during the slow afternoon period. Eli would create his distraction at 5 minutes past 2, giving her time to establish her presence and put Briggs at ease. She'd need to be fast, efficient, and most importantly, she'd need to know exactly what she was looking for. "A ledger," Eli repeated. "Handwritten entries, probably dates, names, property descriptions. It'll be in the bottom drawer of his desk, locked. You'll need this." He produced a set of lockpicks from his coat pocket, tools he'd carried for years but rarely used. "You're asking me to break into a locked drawer in the town clerk's office," Sarah said flatly. "That's a crime." "It is. And I'm not asking lightly. But sometimes the only way to prove a crime has been committed is to commit a smaller one yourself." Sarah took the lockpicks with trembling hands. "I can't believe I'm agreeing to this. Neither can I, if I'm being honest. But we're past the point of safe choices." At 1:30, Eli walked Sarah to the clerk's office, keeping a casual distance so they wouldn't be seen together. Scout stayed back at the hotel, secured in Eli's room with water and food. The dog hadn't been happy about being left behind, but Eli needed him safe for what came next. Eli watched from across the street as Sarah entered the clerk's office. Through the window, he could see Vernon Briggs look up from his desk, surprise crossing his face. Sarah was speaking to him, explaining her business. Briggs nodded and gestured to a chair, then moved to his filing cabinets. At exactly 5 minutes past 2, Eli entered the land office next door. Warren Hayes was at the counter, and his face paled when he saw Eli approach. "Mr. Hayes," Eli said loudly enough to be heard through the thin wall separating the two offices. "I need to file a formal complaint about property mismanagement at the hotel where I'm staying. Seems there's confusion about ownership and tax status. I need you to pull the records immediately." Hayes stared at him, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Sir, that's not really—" "I insist." Eli's voice was firm. "It's a federal matter. Possible interstate commerce violation. I need those records now, and I need you to verify them with Mr. Briggs next door." Hayes swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll need to consult with Mr. Briggs about this." He disappeared into the back office, and Eli heard him knock on the door connecting to Briggs's office. A moment later, both men emerged into the land office, Briggs looking annoyed. "Marshal Boone," Briggs said with poorly concealed irritation. "I understand you have some complaint about the hotel?" "That's right. Seems there's discrepancies in the property records. Tax assessments don't match the filed documents. I need it sorted out before I file my report with the federal marshal's office." It was bureaucratic nonsense, and Briggs knew it. But the mention of federal involvement made him cautious. For the next several minutes, Eli kept both men engaged in his complaint, spinning out details and asking questions that required them to consult various ledgers and documents. Through the window, Eli could glimpse Sarah still in the clerk's office, now alone. His heart hammered as he watched her move behind Briggs's desk. She was fast, efficient, working the lockpicks with surprising skill. The drawer opened. "Marshal," Briggs was saying, his voice sharp with impatience, "I really don't see what any of this has to do with federal jurisdiction. This is a local matter." "Perhaps," Eli interrupted, "but I'd rather be thorough. Now, about these tax assessments." He kept them occupied for 3 more minutes by his pocket watch, then finally nodded. "All right. I think I understand the situation now. Thank you for your time, gentlemen." Briggs practically ran back to his office, clearly anxious to return to his work. Eli followed at a more leisurely pace, arriving just as Sarah was finishing her business at the counter. "Thank you, Mr. Briggs," she was saying, her voice steady despite the fear Eli could see in her eyes. "I appreciate you pulling these records for me. Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Anything else?" "No, that's all I needed." Sarah left and Eli tipped his hat to Briggs. "Sorry for the confusion earlier." "All sorted now." Briggs's eyes narrowed. "Marshal, I'd appreciate it if in the future you'd bring such matters to me directly, rather than involving my colleagues." "I'll keep that in mind." Outside, Eli waited 10 minutes before heading to the boarding house. Sarah met him at the door, her face flushed with excitement and fear. In her hands was a small leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with careful handwriting. "I got it," she whispered. "But Marshal, what I saw in there—" Her voice shook. "It's worse than we thought. So much worse." Eli took the ledger carefully, feeling its weight. Evidence, real, concrete evidence. The kind that could bring down an empire built on stolen property and broken lives. "You did well," he told Sarah. "Better than well. You just struck a blow for every person Flynn's ever hurt. What happens now?" "Now?" Eli tucked the ledger safely under his coat. "Now we find out exactly how deep this corruption goes. And then we burn it down." Eli sat in his hotel room with the ledger spread open on the table. And what he read there changed everything he thought he understood about Bitter Creek. The entries went back 7 years, precisely to when Augustus Flynn had arrived in town. Each page documented property transfers, mining claims, land sales, but these weren't the official records. These were the real transactions, the ones that happened before Briggs filed his sanitized versions with the county. Property after property, claim after claim, all following the same pattern: legitimate owner files paperwork. Owner dies or disappears. Property gets transferred to Flynn or one of his associates for a fraction of its value. Official documents get altered or replaced. And Vernon Briggs's signature certified every single transaction as legal and proper. But it was the final section of the ledger that made Eli's blood run cold. The last dozen pages weren't about property at all. They were about people. Names, dates, locations, and next to each name a single word that made everything clear: relocated. Edward Hart, relocated. Mine collapse May 7, 1884. Samuel Cooper, relocated. Horse accident March 12, 1883. James Wilson, relocated. Hunting accident November 3, 1882. The list went on. 12 names total, all men who'd filed mining claims or owned valuable property. All dead or missing. All their assets now in Flynn's possession. Eli sat back, his mind racing. Relocated wasn't a euphemism for murder. It was something far more organized than that. These weren't random deaths or convenient accidents. This was systematic elimination, carried out with enough variation to avoid pattern recognition, but documented here with the cold precision of a business ledger. Flynn hadn't just corrupted Bitter Creek's bureaucracy. He'd turned it into a machine for stealing everything from people who couldn't fight back, and when theft wasn't enough, he'd made them disappear. A knock at the door pulled Eli from his dark thoughts. He closed the ledger quickly and called out, "Who is it?" "Chen, I need to speak with you." Eli opened the door. Chen looked agitated, his usual calm composure fractured. "Marshal, we have a problem. A big one. Come in." Chen entered and saw the ledger on the table. His eyes widened. "Is that Briggs's private records? Sarah Mitchell got it for me this afternoon." "Then you know." Something in Chen's tone made Eli go still. "Know what?" Chen moved to the window and looked out at the darkening street. "I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid." afraid of what it would mean, what you might do. He turned to face Eli. Marshal, Edward Hart didn't die in a mine collapse. He was murdered. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eli had suspected as much from the ledger, but hearing it said aloud was different. How do you know? Because I helped his widow retrieve his body. Chen's voice was heavy with old grief. The mine entrance was collapsed, yes. But Edward's injuries weren't consistent with a cave-in. His skull was fractured from behind. Clean blow, deliberate. Someone killed him, then staged the collapse to cover it. Did you tell anyone? The sheriff? A federal marshal? Who would I tell? The sheriff works for Flynn. The nearest federal marshal was you, and you were 300 miles away dealing with your own case. Chen's expression was bitter. I told Mabel what I'd seen. She wanted to pursue it, to demand an investigation. But I convinced her it was too dangerous, that Flynn would kill her too if she pushed. So she stopped pushing. Not exactly. She changed tactics. Started documenting everything, keeping records, trying to build a case she could take to a higher authority. But Flynn was too careful. Every piece of evidence disappeared. Every witness recanted. Every document got altered or destroyed. Chen gestured to the ledger. Until now, that ledger is the proof she's been searching for. The proof that Flynn isn't just corrupt, he's a killer. Eli opened the ledger again and found Edward Hart's entry, relocated. May 7th, 1884. The other names in here, they were all murdered too. I don't know for certain, but I suspect so. Too many convenient accidents. Too many men dying right after filing valuable claims. Chen paused. There's something else you need to know. Flynn didn't come to Bitter Creek by accident. He came here specifically because of the silver. Someone told him about the potential, about the claims that were being filed. He came here with a plan and the money to execute it. Who told him? Chen hesitated, then said quietly, "That's the part I haven't been able to figure out." Flynn had information about mining surveys that weren't public. He knew which claims were valuable before anyone else did. Someone with access to assay reports and geological surveys was feeding him information. Eli thought about the assay reports from Edward Hart's claim, all tested by Thomas Garrett in Silver City. The assayer. Could he have been the source? Possibly. But assayers test samples for dozens of people. They'd need to know which claims to target specifically. Eli flipped through more pages of the ledger, looking for patterns. Then he found something that made his breath catch. Near the middle of the book, a page of notes in different handwriting than the rest. Scrawled instructions about which properties to prioritize, which claims showed the most promise. And at the bottom a signature, T.G. Thomas Garrett. The assayer. The assayer was in on it from the start, Eli said aloud. He'd test samples, know which claims were valuable, and report back to Flynn. Then Flynn would target those claim holders. Chen came to look at the page. That makes sense, but it doesn't help us. Garrett's in Silver City. We can't touch him from here. We don't need to touch him. We just need to prove Flynn's operation existed. Eli closed the ledger carefully. This book does that. It shows systematic theft and murder going back 7 years. The question is, what to do with it? Take it to the federal marshal's office. Let them handle it. That's 3 days right away. And the moment Briggs realizes his ledger is missing, Flynn will know we have it. He'll come after us before we can get out of town. Then what do you suggest? Eli stood and walked to the window. Below, Bitter Creek looked peaceful in the early evening light. Families heading home, shopkeepers closing up, the daily rhythms of a community that had no idea it was built on bones and stolen dreams. I suggest we force Flynn's hand, Eli said. Make him come to us on our terms, in a way that exposes him to the whole town. We can't just prove his crimes, we need to make sure everyone sees them. Make sure no one can claim ignorance or look the other way. That's dangerous. If we go public with this, Flynn will have to act. He'll have no choice. I know, but we're running out of options. Briggs will notice the ledger is gone soon, if he hasn't already. When he tells Flynn, they'll move against us. Eli turned from the window. We strike first tomorrow. We call a town meeting and lay out everything we've found. Force Flynn to respond in public where he can't just make us disappear. Chen looked skeptical. You think the town will stand with you? Most people here are terrified of Flynn. Maybe, but some aren't. Sarah Mitchell helped us today. Warren Hayes gave us information. Your family has been supporting Mabel. There are people in this town who know Flynn is wrong, who want to do what's right, but need someone to give them courage. Eli picked up the ledger. This gives them that courage. This proves they aren't crazy for thinking something's wrong, and if you're wrong, if the town sides with Flynn, then at least we tried. At least we stood up and said this isn't acceptable. Eli met Chen's gaze steadily. I've been a lawman most of my life. I've seen corruption before. But this, he gestured to the ledger. This is different. This is evil masquerading as law and order. And I'll be damned if I let it stand. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. We do it your way. But Marshal, you need to understand something. Flynn won't just defend himself tomorrow. He'll try to destroy you. He'll dig into your past, find your weaknesses, use them against you. Let him try. I'm serious. Flynn has resources. He's connected to powerful people beyond Bitter Creek. He didn't build this operation alone. Eli thought about the ledger, about the organized efficiency of the entries, the careful documentation. Chen was right. This was too sophisticated for one man, too well-funded. Flynn was part of something larger. Then we'll deal with that when we come to it, Eli said. First things first, we need to spread the word about tomorrow's meeting. Can you help with that? I can. My wife knows everyone in the Chinese community. They'll come, and they'll bring others. Good. I'll talk to Sarah Mitchell, get her to spread word among the boarding house operators and merchants. We need a big crowd. The more people who see this, the harder it'll be for Flynn to suppress. After Chen left, Eli sat alone with the ledger and Scout, who'd been watching the conversation with alert, intelligent eyes. The dog seemed to sense the gravity of what was coming, the danger they were walking into. Tomorrow, Eli told Scout quietly, tomorrow we see if justice and law can ever be the same thing. He opened the ledger one more time, reading through the entries again, memorizing names and dates. 12 men dead or disappeared. Countless families robbed of their property and futures, and one corrupt system that had allowed it all to happen. But now he had proof. Now he had a weapon. And tomorrow he'd use it to burn Augustus Flynn's empire to the ground, or die trying. Scout moved closer and rested his head on Eli's knee, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. Whatever came next, at least the old Marshal wouldn't face it alone. The word spread through Bitter Creek like wildfire overnight. By dawn, everyone knew about the town meeting. By mid-morning, people were choosing sides. Eli spent the early hours securing the ledger and making copies of the most damning pages. He worked in his hotel room with the door locked, Scout on guard by the window. Every footstep in the hallway made his hand drift toward his Colt. Every creak of floorboards set his nerves on edge. Flynn knew by now that his ledger was missing. The question wasn't if he'd come, but when. At 8 o'clock, Mabel arrived at the hotel with breakfast. She looked different, stronger, more purposeful. The weight of desperation had lifted from her shoulders, replaced by determination. The whole town's talking, she said as she set down a basket of food. Half are excited, half are scared, and Flynn's people are spreading rumors that you're a fraud, that you stole documents to frame an innocent man. Expected that. Eli poured coffee from the pot she'd brought. How are people responding? Mixed. Some remember Edward, remember what happened to him. They're willing to listen. Others, she paused, others have too much to lose. They've benefited from Flynn's system, or they're too afraid to stand against him. And you, how are you holding up? Mabel sat down across from him. I've been waiting 3 years for this moment. 3 years of people calling me crazy, of losing everything I had, of standing on street corners trying to sell the only thing I had left. Her voice was steady, strong. I'm ready. Whatever happens today, I'm ready, Eli nodded. He understood that readiness. The acceptance that comes when you've lost so much that fear becomes irrelevant. The meeting's set for noon, town hall. That gives us 4 hours. What do you need me to do? Be there. Stand with me when I present the evidence. Let people see that you're not crazy, that everything you've been saying is true. He pulled out the copies he'd made from the ledger. These show your husband's claim, the real filing date, the notation about his relocation. The transfer to Flynn's company 3 days after Edward died, Mabel took the papers with shaking hands. Seeing it in black and white, proof of what had been done to her husband, brought tears to her eyes. But she blinked them back and her expression hardened. How many others? 12 total. All following the same pattern. 12 families destroyed. 12 men dead or missing. Her voice was cold now. Flynn deserves worse than prison. Maybe, but prison's what we can give him if we do this right. Eli stood and walked to where Scout lay by the door. The dog's presence had been a constant comfort these past days. Steady, reliable, asking nothing but offering everything. We need to be smart about this. Flynn will have his men at the meeting. They'll try to intimidate people, maybe start violence to break things up before we can present our case. So what's our plan? We control the narrative from the start. I speak first, lay out the evidence methodically. You corroborate with your own experience. Then we open the floor for others, anyone else who's been hurt by Flynn. The more voices we have, the harder it is to dismiss us all as crazy or criminal. A knock at the door interrupted them. Eli's hand went to his gun, but Scout's tail wagged, a signal that whoever was outside wasn't a threat. Eli opened the door to find Warren Hayes, pale and nervous, but present. "Mr. Hayes, come in." Hayes entered quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. "I heard about the meeting, about what you're planning to do, and I want to help. I've been keeping my own records, copies of transactions that didn't make sense, property transfers that seemed fraudulent." He pulled a folder from inside his coat. "Nothing as comprehensive as Briggs's ledger, but it corroborates what you have. Shows the pattern from the land office side." Eli took the folder and flipped through it. Hayes had been meticulous, documenting dates and discrepancies with careful notation. "This is good work. Why didn't you come forward before?" "Because I was a coward." Hayes's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. "I saw what was happening, knew it was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my problem. That speaking up would just cost me my job and change nothing." He met Eli's eyes. "But you changed things just by being here. By believing Mabel, by being willing to stand up when no one else would. I'm glad you're here now. That's what matters." Over the next 2 hours, others arrived. Sarah Mitchell came with documentation of the false tax claims against her property. An elderly rancher brought papers showing how his land had been taken for back taxes he'd already paid. A Chinese merchant showed forged promissory notes that had been used to seize his business. Each person had been isolated, made to feel alone in their victimization. Now they were coming together, seeing the scope of Flynn's operation for the first time. By 11 o'clock, Eli had assembled a case that would be damning in any honest court. The question was whether Bitter Creek's town hall would serve as an honest court, or whether Flynn's power would prove too great to overcome. Chen arrived at 11:30 with news. "Flynn's at the town hall already. He's got maybe 20 men with him. Deputies, ranch hands, anyone he could round up on short notice. They're armed." "Expected that too." Eli checked his Colt, making sure it was loaded and ready. He didn't want violence, but he wasn't naive enough to think it could be avoided. "How many people are gathering?" "Maybe 80, 90, more than I expected." "Word's really spread." Chen lowered his voice. "But Marshal, some of them are there to support Flynn, to shout you down or worse. This could turn ugly fast." "It probably will." Eli gathered the ledger and the supporting documents, securing them in a leather satchel. "But we're committed now." "No turning back," Mabel stood. "Then let's go face him." The walk to the town hall felt longer than it was. Word had indeed spread. People lined the street watching the small group move through town. Some faces showed support, others hostility. Most just showed curiosity, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Scout walked at Eli's side, alert to every movement. The dog seemed to sense the tension in the air, the potential for violence. His ears were pricked forward, his body coiled and ready. The town hall was a simple wooden building, large enough to hold maybe 100 people if they packed in tight. When Eli entered, he saw it was nearly full. Flynn sat at the front on the stage, normally reserved for official business, flanked by his men. Sheriff Ketchum stood nearby, hand resting on his gun. Vernon Briggs sat at a desk to one side, looking nervous despite his position of power. The crowd quieted as Eli made his way down the center aisle. Every eye followed him, some hopeful, some fearful, some openly hostile. He climbed the steps to the stage, Mabel and the others following. Scout remained at the base of the stairs, positioning himself where he could see both the stage and the crowd. Flynn stood, his smile confident and cold. "Marshal Boone, I'm surprised you showed up. Most men with any sense would have left town by now." "I'm not most men." Eli set his satchel on a table and opened it. "And I'm here to present evidence of crimes committed against the citizens of Bitter Creek. Crimes you orchestrated, Mayor Flynn." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Flynn raised his hand for silence. Strong accusation from a man who's only been in town a few days. "What possible evidence could you have?" "This." Eli held up the ledger. "Your private records, the real accounting. Of every property you've stolen, every claim you've manipulated, every person you've had killed or driven out of town." The murmurs grew louder. Flynn's smile never wavered, but Eli saw his eyes flicker to Briggs. The town clerk had gone white. "That's an interesting story," Flynn said calmly. "But I've never seen that book before. You could have written anything in there." "Could have, didn't need to." Eli opened the ledger to a marked page. "This entry here details the transfer of the Hart claim on May 10th, 1884, 3 days after Edward Hart died in what you staged as a mine collapse. It shows the real transaction. Hart's claim valued at $20,000, transferred to your mining company for $1,000. With notation that Hart had been relocated." Mabel stepped forward. "My husband was murdered. His skull was fractured from behind. Then the mine entrance was collapsed to hide the crime. And this man," she pointed at Flynn, "stole everything Edward worked for." "Prove it," Flynn said coldly. "Prove any of it. You have a book that could have been written by anyone. You have wild accusations from a widow everyone knows is unbalanced. We have more than that." Warren Hayes's voice was shaky but determined. He held up his folder. "I have land office records showing the same pattern of fraudulent transfers, property seized for false debts, claims transferred without proper documentation. I have tax records," Sarah Mitchell added, "showing debts that don't exist, used to justify seizing my boarding house." One by one, the people Eli had gathered presented their evidence. Each piece alone might be dismissed. Together, they painted an undeniable picture of systematic corruption and theft. The crowd was riveting their attention back and forth between the accusers and Flynn. Eli could see doubt beginning to form on some faces, the realization that maybe the stories they'd dismissed weren't crazy after all. Flynn's confidence was starting to crack. "Sheriff Ketchum, arrest these people. They're presenting forged documents and making slanderous accusations against a sitting mayor." The sheriff moved forward, but his heart wasn't in it. Eli could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Now let's not be hasty." "I said arrest them." Flynn's voice was sharp now, desperate. "On what charge?" Eli demanded. "Telling the truth? Presenting evidence of crimes." This ledger came from Vernon Briggs's office. Every entry is in his handwriting except for the notes from Thomas Garrett in Silver City, the assayer who was feeding you information about valuable claims. Briggs stood abruptly. "That's not true. I've never—" "Never what?" Eli cut him off. "Never kept a private ledger documenting the real transactions? Then explain how I got this book from your office yesterday. Explain why it's in your handwriting. Explain why it contains information that could only come from you." Briggs looked to Flynn for help, but the mayor's expression had turned cold and calculating. Eli recognized that look. It was the look of a man deciding whether witnesses needed to be silenced permanently. "Enough of this circus," Flynn said. He gestured to his men. "Clear the hall. This meeting is over. This meeting's just getting started." Eli's voice carried authority that had nothing to do with his badge. "And it doesn't end until every person in this town knows what you've done, until they understand that their mayor is a murderer and a thief who's been stealing from them for 7 years. Flynn's hand moved toward his gun. Eli's moved toward his. For a frozen moment the hall was silent except for breathing and the sound of Scout's low growl from the base of the stage. Then someone in the crowd spoke up. "Let him finish. Let's hear what he has to say." Another voice joined in. "Yeah, I want to know about my brother's claim, the one that disappeared after he died." More voices, more demands to hear the truth. The momentum was shifting, and Flynn could feel it. His power had always depended on people being isolated, afraid, believing they were alone in their suspicions. But now they were together, and the truth was emerging into the light. Flynn's eyes swept the crowd, measuring, calculating. Then he smiled, a terrible smile that held no warmth. "All right, Marshal, you want the truth? Let's talk about truth. Let's talk about who you really are and why you're really here." Eli felt cold settle in his gut. Whatever Flynn was about to say, it wouldn't be good. "You're not just a broken-down marshal passing through," Flynn continued. "You're Eli Boone, the same Eli Boone who was removed from his position 5 years ago for corruption. The same Eli Boone who was taking bribes from railroad companies to overlook land theft. The same Eli Boone who got shot not in the line of duty, but by a rancher whose property you helped steal." The words hit like physical blows. Eli heard gasps from the crowd, saw doubt replace the trust that had been building on people's faces, and the worst part was that some of it was true. The silence in the town hall was absolute. Every eye had turned to Eli, waiting for his response to Flynn's accusation. Mabel looked stricken. Chen's expression showed confusion and concern, and Flynn's smile widened, sensing victory. Eli stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of his past settle on his shoulders like an old coat. He'd known this moment might come, had known Flynn would dig into his history, find the ammunition he needed. The question was how to respond. He could lie, deny everything. But lies had never sat well with him, and they wouldn't help him now. So he told the truth. "Mayor Flynn is partially correct," Eli said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. 5 years ago, I was investigating land fraud involving a railroad company. And yes, I was working with them, but not for bribes. I was gathering evidence for federal prosecution. The rancher who shot me thought I was part of the scheme. He was wrong, but I don't blame him for thinking it. Things looked bad. He paused, meeting eyes throughout the crowd. The bullet shattered my knee and ended my career as an active marshal. The railroad case fell apart because my testimony was compromised. Some people thought I was dirty. Others knew the truth but couldn't prove it. So I retired with a tarnished reputation and a bad leg, and I've been living with both ever since. "A convenient story," Flynn said, "and no way to verify it. Actually, there is." Eli reached into his coat and pulled out a folded telegram. "I wired the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver 2 days ago, requesting my service record. This is their response. It arrived this morning." He unfolded the telegram and read, "Marshal, Eli Boone served with distinction for 32 years. His investigation of railroad land fraud led to 14 convictions. He was wounded in the line of duty and retired honorably. His reputation within this office remains unblemished." He held up the telegram for the crowd to see. Signed by Marshal William Davis, Chief Deputy for the Western District. Anyone who doubts can wire Denver themselves and verify. The dynamic in the room shifted again. People were reassessing, reconsidering. Flynn's attempt to discredit Eli had backfired. "So yes," Eli continued, "I've made mistakes. I've had my reputation questioned. But I've never stolen from widows, never murdered men for their property, never built an empire on theft and lies." He looked directly at Flynn. "Can you say the same?" Flynn's expression had gone cold and dangerous. "You're playing a game you can't win, Boone. This town is mine. These people," he gestured to the crowd, "work for me, buy from my businesses, bank at my bank. You think one old marshal with a book full of lies can change that? It's not lies." Mabel's voice was steady and strong. "Everything in that ledger is true, My husband was murdered, our claim was stolen, and I've spent 3 years watching this town pretend it didn't happen because they were too afraid or too bought off to stand up for what's right. I remember Edward Hart, a voice called from the crowd. An older man stood up. Good man, hard worker. He did strike silver. I saw the ore samples myself. And 3 weeks later he was dead. Always thought that was convenient for some folks. Another voice. My cousin lost his ranch 2 years back. Taxes he'd already paid, but somehow the records showed different. Flynn bought the property for half what it was worth. More voices joined in. The dam was breaking. People who'd been silent for years were finally speaking up, emboldened by Eli's courage and Mabel's persistence. Flynn's men were looking uncertain now, outnumbered and facing a hostile crowd. Even Sheriff Ketchum had stepped back, his hand moving away from his gun. "This is insurrection," Flynn said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Sheriff, I order you to clear this hall and arrest anyone who resists." Ketchum didn't move. "Mayor, maybe we should hear them out. If there's evidence of wrongdoing, the only wrongdoing here is this kangaroo court." Flynn's composure was cracking. "I've built this town. I've brought prosperity and order. And this is how you repay me, by believing the lies of a disgraced marshal and a crazy widow." "Careful how you speak about Mrs. Hart," Eli said quietly, and something in his tone made Flynn take a step back. "She's shown more courage in 3 years than you've shown in your entire life." Flynn's hand moved to his gun. "I've had enough of this. So have I." Eli's hand was already on his Colt. "You can draw if you want. But before you do, understand something. That ledger's already been copied. I sent duplicates to the federal marshal's office in Denver and the territorial governor in Silver City. Even if you kill me, even if you kill everyone in this hall, the evidence will still exist. Your empire's already fallen. You just haven't realized it yet." Flynn's face went white. "You're bluffing, am I? You want to bet your life on that?" Eli took a step forward. "Or maybe you want to tell these people the truth. Tell them about the 12 men in that ledger. Tell them about Thomas Garrett in Silver City, feeding you information. Tell them how you've systematically stolen everything from people who trusted this town to protect them." For a moment Flynn seemed to deflate. Then rage replaced fear in his eyes. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me." His hand went for his gun. Eli was faster. The shot echoed through the town hall like thunder. Flynn's gun clattered to the floor. He stood there stunned, staring at his empty hand. Eli's bullet had struck the weapon just as Flynn cleared leather, sending it spinning away across the stage. "Next one won't be so merciful," Eli said. His Colt still trained on the mare. The hall erupted in chaos. Flynn's men reached for their weapons, but Scout launched himself onto the stage with a snarl that stopped them cold. The dog positioned himself between Eli and Flynn's men, teeth bared, every muscle coiled and ready to attack. "I wouldn't," Eli said calmly to the armed men. "My dog's faster than you are, and I'm faster than all of you. And more importantly, look around." They did. The crowd had risen from their seats. Ranchers, miners, merchants, people who'd been silent for years. They weren't armed, but there were 80 of them, and their faces showed they'd had enough. The balance of power had shifted completely. Sheriff Ketchum stepped forward, his hand hovering near his gun, but not drawing. "Mayor Flynn, I'm placing you under arrest for—" He paused, seeming to realize the magnitude of what he was about to do. "For suspicion of murder, theft, and corruption." "You can't arrest me," Flynn said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "I'm the mayor. I own this town. Not anymore, you don't." Vernon Briggs's voice was shaky but determined. The town clerk stood up, his face pale but resolute. "I can't live with this anymore. Everything the marshal said is true. I kept those records because Flynn insisted on it. Said we needed documentation in case of disputes. But I knew what they really showed. I knew and I said nothing, and I'm as guilty as he is." "Briggs, shut your mouth," Flynn started, but Briggs talked over him. "There are 12 men dead, 12 families destroyed. Also, Flynn could steal their property." Briggs pulled papers from his coat, official documents with stamps and seals. "These are the real mining claim filings, the ones I was supposed to destroy but couldn't bring myself to. They prove every transfer Flynn made was fraudulent. The hall was silent again, but this time the silence was stunned rather than hostile. Briggs was confessing, providing corroboration beyond what Eli had already presented. Why? Mabel's voice cut through the quiet. Why did you do it? My Ed would never hurt you. None of those people hurt you? Briggs looked at her with something like shame. Money. Flynn paid me well, and I told myself it was just paperwork. Just moving documents around. I never pulled a trigger or swung a pick. His voice broke. I just made sure no one could prove what really happened. And I'm sorry. God help me, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring my husband back, Mabel said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. She understood the weight of guilt, the cost of choices made in fear or greed. Sheriff Ketchum moved to Flynn, pulling his arms behind his back. One of the townsmen produced a length of rope, and they bound the mayor's hands securely. Flynn didn't resist. He seemed to understand that resistance was pointless now. What about the others? Someone in the crowd called out. Flynn didn't do this alone. What about his men? What about Garrett in Silver City? The evidence goes to the territorial governor and the federal marshal's office, Eli said. They'll handle the prosecution. Everyone involved will answer for what they've done. He looked at Flynn, including you. Flynn met his eyes with a cold stare. You think this changes anything? You think justice means something out here? I'll have lawyers. I'll have friends in high places who'll make this go away. Maybe, Eli acknowledged. But that ledger's already in federal hands. The evidence is documented, and every person in this room heard Briggs's confession. You can try to fight it, but you won't win. Not this time. The fight went out of Flynn then. He sagged in Ketchum's grip, looking suddenly old and tired. The emperor with no clothes, his power revealed as nothing more than fear and lies. Chen stepped onto the stage. The question now is what happens to Bitter Creek. Flynn controlled nearly everything. The bank, half the businesses, most of the property. We need to sort out what belongs to whom. That'll take time, Eli said. But those claim documents Briggs saved are a start. Every legitimate owner can prove their case. The courts will have to sort through it, but at least now they can. Mabel approached Flynn, looking him directly in the eyes. You took everything from me. My husband, my home, my dignity. You made this town think I was crazy for wanting justice. Her voice was steady, strong. But I'm still here. I'm still standing. And you're the one in chains. Flynn said nothing. What could he say? The crowd began filing out of the hall, talking excitedly among themselves. The story of what had happened would spread through Bitter Creek like wildfire, and by tomorrow the whole territory would know. The town that had been built on corruption was getting its chance at redemption. Eli holstered his Colt and picked up the ledger. Scout came to his side, the dog's earlier aggression replaced by calm watchfulness. They'd done what they came to do. Justice had been served, or at least the machinery of justice had been set in motion. Sheriff Ketchum approached with Flynn in custody. I'll need to hold him until the territorial marshal arrives. That could be a few days. I'll stay until then, Eli said. Make sure nothing happens to the evidence, or to the witnesses. Appreciate that, Marshal. Ketchum paused. I should have seen it sooner. Should have done something. I knew things weren't right, but Flynn, we all make choices, Eli said. What matters is what you do now. You can help make this right. Help these people get back what was taken from them. Ketchum nodded and led Flynn away. The former mayor went without a fight. His shoulders slumped, his empire crumbling around him. Mabel stood beside Eli, watching Flynn disappear through the door. Thank you, she said quietly. For believing me, for helping me, for standing up when no one else would. You did the standing, Eli replied. I just provided backup. They walked out of the town hall together into the bright afternoon sunlight, Scout trotting alongside. Bitter Creek looked the same as it had that morning. The same storefronts, the same dusty street, the same mountains rising in the distance. But everything had changed. The truth had come to light. Justice had been done. And a town built on stolen dreams was getting its chance to build something better. 3 weeks later, Eli stood on the same street corner where he'd first seen Mabel Hart. The place looked different now. Or maybe it was his perspective that had changed. The storefronts seemed brighter, the people more relaxed. Bitter Creek was healing, slowly but surely. Scout sat beside him, patient as always. The dog had proven himself more than just a loyal companion. He'd been a partner in the truest sense, sensing danger, providing comfort, standing firm when things got difficult. Eli reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears, earning a contented sigh. The territorial marshal had arrived a week ago and taken Flynn, Briggs, and 3 of Flynn's key associates into custody. They were awaiting trial in Silver City, where the courts would sort through the evidence and render judgment. Thomas Garrett, the assayer, had been arrested as well after federal marshals raided his office and found records confirming his role in the scheme. The process of returning stolen property to its rightful owners had begun. It would take months, maybe years, to fully untangle Flynn's web of corruption. But the work had started, and there was hope now where there had been none before. Mabel approached from across the street, and Eli smiled to see her. She looked transformed from the desperate woman he'd met that first day. Her dress was still simple, still worn, but she carried herself with the dignity that came from vindication. The town that had called her crazy now looked at her with respect, even admiration. "Marshal," she greeted him. "I heard you're leaving today. Tomorrow morning, actually. But yes, time for me to move on. Will you go to Silver City? Testify at the trial? I will. The territorial prosecutor needs my testimony about how I obtained the evidence, what Flynn said at the town meeting. Should be straightforward enough." Mabel nodded, then looked down at Scout. "And him? What happens to my dog? If it's all right with you, I'd like to keep him." Eli's voice was gruff with emotion he didn't quite know how to express. "He's been good company." "Better than good. He paused, searching for the right words. "He's been a reminder that loyalty still means something, that some bonds can't be broken by circumstances or hardship. He was always good at that." Mabel knelt down and took Scout's face in her hands, looking into the dog's intelligent eyes. "You take care of this stubborn old marshal, you hear? Keep him honest. Keep him safe." Scout's tail wagged, and he licked her hand gently. "And you—" She stood and looked at Eli. "You take care of him too. He's given me 3 years of loyalty when I had nothing else. He deserves a good life. He'll have it. I promise." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the town bustle around them. Then Mabel said, "The land office processed Edward's claim yesterday, officially restored it to my name. The mine's been sitting idle for 3 years, but the silver's still there. I'm hiring miners to work it proper, doing it right this time. That's good. That's real good. The Chens are helping me. Warren Hayes, too. We're forming a cooperative. People who lost property to Flynn, working together to rebuild what was taken." Her voice held quiet pride. "We're calling it Heart's Hope, after Edward's sign." Seemed fitting. Eli felt warmth spread through his chest. This was what justice was supposed to look like. Not just punishment for wrongdoing, but restoration of what had been stolen. People getting back not just their property, but their dignity, their hope, their future. "Edward would be proud," Eli said. "You've honored his memory in the best way possible. I couldn't have done it without you. Without your belief, your courage, your willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it cost you." Mabel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You gave me back more than my husband's claim. You gave me back my voice, my right to be heard. You always had that right. I just helped you claim it." Sarah Mitchell appeared then, walking with Chen. Both looked purposeful, determined. The 3 of them, Mabel, Sarah, and Chen, had formed the core of Bitter Creek's rebuilding effort. They met daily, organizing the cooperative, helping people file claims, providing support to those who'd been victimized by Flynn's machine. "Marshal," Chen said, extending his hand, "we wanted to catch you before you left. To thank you properly. No thanks necessary. I was just passing through, remember? You were, but you chose to stay, chose to fight for people you barely knew. That's not just passing through, that's character." Chen pulled an envelope from his pocket. "The town council, the new one, voted to give you this. It's not much, but it's our way of saying what you did mattered." Eli opened the envelope and found currency inside, more than he'd expected. "Chen, I can't accept this. I didn't do this for money. We know." That's exactly why you should take it. Your horse needs shoes. You'll need supplies for the journey. And winter's coming. Chen's expression was firm. Besides, it's already approved. You'd be insulting the whole town if you refused. Eli looked at the money, then at the faces surrounding him. These people who'd been beaten down, robbed, silenced. They were standing tall now, taking control of their future. And they wanted to honor him for his part in that transformation. All right, he said quietly. I accept. With gratitude. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Eli walked back to the hotel one final time. His room was packed, his belongings ready for tomorrow's departure. But tonight, his last night in Bitter Creek, he wanted to remember how it had been and reflect on what it had become. He sat by the window with Scout at his feet and thought about the journey that had brought him here. He'd been heading to Silver City to testify about another man's character when he'd stopped in Bitter Creek for rest. Instead, he'd found something more important, a chance to prove his own character, to show that age and injury hadn't diminished what mattered most. Sometimes the cruelest thing isn't losing everything. It's watching others pretend you never had anything to lose. That's what he'd thought when he first saw Mabel Hart standing on that corner with her sign. But he'd learned something since then. The cruelest thing wasn't the loss or the denial. It was the silence. Good people staying quiet when they should speak up, looking away when they should bear witness. And the bravest thing was a woman refusing to be silenced, standing on a street corner day after day, maintaining her dignity even when the world called her crazy. The bravest thing was a scared young clerk keeping records because he couldn't quite bring himself to destroy the truth. The bravest thing was a widow risking everything to break into an office for a ledger that might change nothing. Eli had thought he was riding into Bitter Creek to help Mabel Hart. But really, he'd been the one who needed help, needed to remember that justice wasn't just about law and badges and authority. It was about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Standing together when standing alone seemed easier. Scout stirred and rested his head on Eli's knee, and the old marshal felt something settle in his chest. Not quite peace, but close enough. Tomorrow, he'd ride out of Bitter Creek with a borrowed dog and a restored sense of purpose. He'd testify at the trial, see justice through to its conclusion. But he'd never forget the widow with the handwritten sign. The words written in careful schoolteacher script, "Good dog, $50. Please help." That sign, now carefully preserved in his saddlebag, represented more than a desperate plea. It represented dignity in the face of loss, hope in the face of despair, and the quiet courage of refusing to surrender even when the world had given up on you. Outside, Bitter Creek settled into evening, and Eli Boone, 63 years old, half lame, but not quite broken, allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some things in this world could still be made right. Scout's tail thumped twice against the floor, as if to say he'd known that all along.